Thank you, Alicia. And good morning, everyone, or afternoon. Thank you for joining. My name is Monica Arenas, and I'm from Futures Without Violence, and we're hosting today's webinar. This webinar is part of a project called Building Collaborative Responses to Traffic Victims of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, supported by the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. And as part of this project, we have an extraordinary team of faculty who have extensive experience developing programs and collaborations to address human trafficking. And today, we are honored to have one of our faculty members from the program, Perla Flores. Perla is the director of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault and Human Trafficking Programs at Community Solutions, a nonprofit organization that serves South Santa Clara County and San Benito County in California. Perla is a commissioner on the Santa Clara County Domestic Violence Council, and she also chairs the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking. She was the recipient of the 2010 California Peace Prize and also the 2015 Outstanding Advocate Award. She has co-authored the Human Trafficking Advocate Manual, a resource guide for domestic violence and sexual assault advocates working with human trafficking, as well as develop guidelines and promising practices on human trafficking and interventions in case management. And so the webinar has three parts or three sections. And so as a result of this webinar, you will be better able to describe the intersections of human trafficking with domestic violence and sexual assault. And then secondly, we will identify strategies that your organization can take to address human trafficking in collaboration with others in your community. So we will go over about 10 different things that you can work to address or enhance human trafficking services in collaboration with others. And then the third part, we will go through resources and support available to enhance your services. And so that's for the learning objectives. And then, so now we would like to, for the first step, we would like to find out who is participating in the webinar. And we have a poll to find out who's in the room. Great. We have a great group of registrants. We had a lot of people interested. Thank you so much for your interest. And we have a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault service providers and people that are working on domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And also sexual assault, domestic violence only, and community-based organizations. Yeah, thank you everyone for participating. And so we have a great group, a mixed group. Now we will also like to know your experience, about your experience. I know some of you have no experience at all, and others have a lot of experience, or not a lot, but some experience. So we have this second poll. And here we see that we have some people that have experience with domestic adult sex trafficking survivors. That's the most experience that people have. And we also have a good group of people that have no experience at all, and also domestic minor and labor trafficking survivors under 18. Some experience with foreign-born. Great. But it seems like you have some experience already, or some of you have experience. So thank you so much for sharing. And then, so because we knew that there was a mixed group, we sent a link to a video and just wanted to not give you kind of like an orientation, a preliminary orientation about human trafficking, if you were not familiar with this. So not sure if you were able to see the video. The video just shows what is human trafficking and the trafficking in different communities and experiences. So if you saw the video, you can put in the chat. Great, yeah, someone is already saying the video was great. Thank you. I'm glad you saw it. And it's a short 6-minute video. And this video, can also be used as a resource for you for education in the community. Thank you. We see that you're sharing. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you saw it. Yeah, so now we will go to the next section, and we would like to start with a brief overview of human trafficking, because we know that we have different levels of experiences, and then we'll also go into the intersections with human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. So now I will turn it over to Perla, who will go over the human trafficking definition.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you for all the participants that are with us on this webinar today. It's really nice to be with you today. So just to go over briefly the definition of human trafficking, or the human trafficking federal law, which is captured in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was first passed in 2000, and we refer to it as a TVPA, and it's been reauthorized since then in 2003, 2005, 2008, and 2013. And so what this act does, it basically creates 3 different categories for types of human trafficking. So the first category, it talks about a commercial sexual act that's induced by force, fraud, or coercion. So it's also referred to as adult sex trafficking. So it has to be induced by force, fraud, or coercion, and the victim has to be over the age of 18. However, the second category refers to a commercial act of a minor that has not, or an individual that has not attained the age of 18. So a lot of times we'll refer to this as commercially sexually exploited children. Also the acronym that is used most commonly is CSEC. So in this case, when anybody that's under the age of 18 is induced to perform a commercial sex act, if the individual is under 18, there is no need to prove the force, fraud, or coercion. The last category for trafficking is labor trafficking, and this includes the recruitment, harboring, transporting, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services, and that's also through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjecting that person to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. And I'm going to go on here to the next slide. To make this, it can be a little bit confusing. So if we think about the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, it really entails 3 elements. The first element goes through the process. So this is the action that was taken by the potential trafficker, and it could be recruiting an individual, or harboring an individual, or moving, or obtaining the person, or attempting to do any of those things. So the good thing about the law is that it doesn't require all of these elements. It's just one of them, or recruiting, or harboring, or moving, or obtaining. The second element is the means. What means were used to be able to, again, recruit, or harbor, or move, or obtain that person. And the means have to include some type of force, some type of fraud, or coercion. And then the last element is, what's the purpose? What was the end goal here? So the purpose have to be for voluntary servitude, or debt bondage, or slavery, or sex trade. So again, these are the 3 elements that we are looking at when we think about whether a survivor that we're working with can potentially be a human trafficking victim. But remember, if that individual is under the age of 18 and the purpose is for commercial sex, we don't have to worry about the element number 2. So to look at this a little bit more practically, we're going to have a case scenario here that I'm going to ask Moni to read for us.
Thank you. So we have the scenario here of VA. So VA came into our office looking for support after Jay, her abusive partner, filed for custody of their 1-year-old child. VA met Jay online, and he convinced her to relocate from her country to the U.S. The plan was that they would live together and eventually get married. Shortly after arriving in the U.S., VA found out that Jay was already legally married, and he had no intention to leave his wife for VA. Jay used VA as a domestic and sex servant for almost 2 years.
So this was an actual case that our agency worked with. So the individual VA looking for services came into our domestic violence agency and presented this scenario. So Monica, do you think in this scenario that there was some type of human trafficking involved? And we can go back and look at our chart to see if this scenario meets those 3 elements that we talked about earlier.
Sure. I think for the process, we see that VA was recruited. She was convinced to relocate to another place, and I think, in this scenario, she relocated to another country, to the U.S., but she could have relocated to another state, to another city as well. And then for the means, I think there was also coercion and fraud, and since Jay was already married and had no intention to leave his wife, we don't know if Jay took her papers or there was any debt or threat involved, but there was coercion and fraud as well involved. I see that. And then for the end, based on the scenario or the purpose, for Jay used VA as a domestic and sex servant, and now is trying to remove the child that they had together from her through forced sex, most likely. And there's also involuntary servitude, and we don't know if there was any debt involved as well.
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of the cases that we see of domestic violence where there's also human trafficking, the means that are used are fraud, where an individual promises his or her partner, you're going to come live with me, we're going to get married, we're going to have a family, etc., and then ends up exploiting that individual. And it could be for labor, which was in the case of VA, where she was forced to not only work in the home, perform sex acts for the person that exploited her, but also work in his business without getting any type of pay. But we've also seen situations where there's many situations where there's that intersections of human trafficking and domestic violence as it relates to sex trafficking, and we will definitely talk a little bit about that more as we go on today. Let me get back to our next slide so that Monique can take us through what those intersections look like.
Yeah, so each scenario is different, but for human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault, the intersections and the push factors are the same. Like domestic violence and sexual assault, trafficking is about power and control and exploitation of people, particularly women and children. And trafficking is rooted in the interconnected systems of oppression and inequality, and Perla will go over that as well in a minute. And so, in human trafficking cases, like in the power and control wheel, we see coercion and threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing and denying or blaming, sexual abuse, economic abuse, physical abuse. So that's, very clear in terms of the, not clear, but it can be very interactive in terms of the intersections with domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking. And also in what we've been hearing is that a lot of the cases of domestic violence, sometimes they're screened or they go for help for domestic violence, and after more in-depth assistance or after more in-depth screening, they see that there was also human trafficking involved. And now Perla will share more about intersections.
So for us at Community Solutions and for the domestic violence service providers in our county, we're very fortunate in Santa Clara County to have several service providers. And we approach this work from a framework that addresses all different forms and intersections of gender-based violence. So intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment. We don't see a lot of, fortunately, bride burning or honor killings here in our area. But for us, it's really important that we uphold a comprehensive, again, intersectional approach to issues of violence against women, and that we don't see these issues, particularly sexual assault, domestic violence, or human trafficking, as issues that happen in isolation from each other, but rather as symptoms of a larger issue, and the root cause of which is gender-based violence. And the different patriarchy and power and control systems that come into play. And so again, for us, human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, we see these all as manifestations of the symptoms that are caused by gender-based violence. And it's important for us to acknowledge that so that we are screening very comprehensively to ensure that we're addressing all the different types of trauma that somebody might have experienced. And also, as we'll talk about a little bit later on, ensuring that every individual is linked with the benefits and the legal remedies that they're entitled to based on the specific crime that's been perpetrated against them. Some of the similarities and experiences of trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault survivors can include physical violence, restrictions of freedom of movement, a lot of control, isolation, financial control and dependence. Intimidation and fear is a huge factor that we see frequently. Survivors face similar barriers to leaving abusive situations and reintegrating in their community when it comes to either being in a situation with a partner that's abusive, or if they're living with their trafficker. So it's really important to keep in mind all of that. Often the trafficker may be the only person that the victim knows, and so that really increases their isolation and dependency. And it's really important to keep in mind, again, that survivors experience frequent acts of violence across a long period of time, and so can often result in severe psychological trauma. Many times human trafficking survivors, as with domestic violence survivors, are not connected to any family or community of support because of the high levels of control and isolation that happen. Many times, particularly for foreign-born survivors, they don't know what their legal rights are. They might have been conditioned to not trust the police, to not trust the court systems. Many times there's also language barriers. For us particularly, about 50% of our clients are foreign-born and speak a different language, so that's a huge concern. Many human trafficking survivors, like domestic violence survivors, if there's children involved, they're concerned about their children. They're concerned about being involved with child welfare, and that might result in losing their custody. And also just keeping in mind that, like domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, human trafficking survivors can be anyone. We've worked with women, with children of all nationalities, all socioeconomic statuses, all races, ages, and faiths. So that's another similarity that human trafficking survivors have in common with domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. So back in 2003 in Santa Clara County, the domestic violence providers convened a forum to talk about, since the Trafficking Victim Protection Act had passed in 2000, and we were seeing human trafficking survivors, we were identifying survivors of human trafficking that came to our agencies looking for domestic violence or sexual assault support. We realized that the domestic violence and sexual assault service providers were the best positioned to extend existing services to human trafficking survivors because of many reasons. Importantly, because of our service philosophy of being trauma-informed, empowerment-based, and client-centered really extends well to any type of a trauma or abuse survivor. We also already had the access to support systems, the emergency shelter, advocacy support, therapeutic support that we're providing to domestic violence and sexual assault survivors that, again, could easily be extended to human trafficking survivors. The similarity and control tactics that are used by perpetrators are really surprising, and again, our staff are really trained to identify that. There's similarities in victim vulnerabilities and barriers to leaving an exploitive or abusive situation, and we talked a little bit about that earlier on. Perhaps lack of legal status, again, chronic trauma, language barriers, lack of financial independence, all those things came into play. And we also had a commitment to serving victims of gender-based violence comprehensively and not limited by the type of victimization. So at that point, these organizations were already working on these different intersectionalities of violence against women, including addressing the intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, discrimination, perhaps sexual harassment in the workplace. So it just made the most sense for domestic violence and sexual assault providers to extend our comprehensive web of support and also leverage the existing partnerships that we were able to develop in supporting domestic violence and sexual assault survivors to then be able to comprehensively support human trafficking survivors.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I think we slipped, oh, here. Just skip the slide. So now in terms of why traffic survivors go to or are referred to domestic violence and sexual assault organizations. So, as many of you know already and have experienced that, especially in rural communities, DVSA organizations may be the only organization that providing services. They're responding to community outreach. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't identify as trafficked. And also maybe, as mentioned, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And especially for sexual violence usually occurs in almost every type of trafficking situation, including the commercial sex in the servile marriage, in cases of forced labor. So in all of these situations, it is important to remember that no one agrees to be sexually assaulted or trafficked, despite appearances of consent at various stages of the trafficking or sexual assault. We also see that survivors need assistance from several organizations because they have different needs. So this leads us to reviewing more about the needs of survivors. And Perla has worked on this in terms of dividing the different types of needs based on the experiences that they've had over the years, and they came up with a chart that divides the needs of survivors in the 3 phases. So, they're extensive. All of the services that they need and support are also unique to each individual based on the experience of the survivor. If they're adult, minor, foreign-born, if they're men or have any special needs and disabilities, and also if they're a group or, how long were they trafficked. We hear some minors that were started to be trafficked when they were 12, 15, 16, but then now that they're getting help, they're now 20 or 25, but they haven't been able to go through or learning some basic things of life, regular life that we're all accustomed to. So they need support. So this chart shows the acute crisis needs. And in this area, we see, emergency crisis support, and usually it's within the first 30 days of when they're getting some help or start getting some help. And then we also see, during this stage, they will most likely need housing, food, medical and mental health, legal emergency, child care assistance. And then they go more into more immediate short-term transitional needs. And this is usually 30 days to 8 months. And so it will need more case management, mental health, more safety planning, and legal needs that include T visa, U visa, help with civil and criminal history, protection orders, and some financial support as well. And then the third stage is into long-term support needs for stability and sustainability, and this can be for 8 months to 2 years or longer. And at the same time, all of these needs are not linear, so they can need support in different areas based on anything that can trigger their event or things that they went through, and then they can go through crisis again, like if they're asked to testify. So I would also like to highlight that in terms of the needs, people were asked to identify the most important needs for survivors, and the four most important needs that organizations identified is, of course, safety, and then housing, emergency shelter, followed by the need for health care, very high for health care, including mental health and counseling, medical care, trauma-informed care, and substance use treatment. They also identify legal services and emergency financial aid, as well as employment assistance as important needs for survivors. Bella, do you want to add anything to this?
I think that one piece that's really important to point out here, because when Community Solutions developed our case management model for human trafficking survivors, we realized that working with human trafficking survivors was very different than what we were accustomed with domestic violence survivors, for example, that they're kind of a short period of time if they're in our shelters, so it's a short period of intense support. And then we had sexual assault survivors that perhaps we supported over a longer period of time while they were going through the, if there was a criminal court pending, court process pending. So it was over a couple of years of time, but with minimal support. And so human trafficking survivors were very different in terms of the breadth and depth of services that they required. So we developed this case management approach that looks at 3 distinct phases in case management. And the first one, which we call the crisis phase, as Monica mentioned, is from the point that begins when we identify the survivor and start supporting them, lasts up to 30 days. And during that time, our entire focus is on ensuring that that survivor has their basic needs met. So if you think it kind of follow the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so we ensure that the basic needs are met: housing, food, medical attention that's necessary, any immediate safety concerns, like perhaps for a restraining order, things of that nature, communication with their family back at home. And that can last up to about 30 days. As Monica mentioned, our transitional support phase, which we also call the stabilization phase, begins after the crisis intervention phase is over, because we understand that if somebody is still in crisis and doesn't have their basic needs met, it'll be really challenging for them to be able to focus on beginning to establish their economic independence and self-sufficiency. So that piece to us is really important. And this transitional phase usually lasts up to 8 months. It can last a little bit longer for foreign-born survivors as they're waiting for their work permits to come in, as they're going through the process to receive some type of vocational training, really trying to integrate into the community. It lasts longer for survivors where English is not their first language, and in order to be self-sufficient and have a well-paying job, they need to brush up on their English as a second language skill. And during that time, we're also ensuring that survivors have access to housing, in addition to the basic needs, but we're also taking on that second component, which goes more towards job readiness, and again, establishing economic independence. The last phase of our case management approach begins once somebody gets into stable housing, which again could take up to 8 months from the first point of contact, sometimes takes up to a year, and that last phase will last about a couple of years, because on average, we've seen that human trafficking survivors that remain in the area and decide to avail themselves of all the case management and legal support that we can offer, those cases are typically open for an average of 3 years. That is very common for us. So during that long-term support, our role is really to continue to provide, if there is therapeutic support that's needed, case management, kind of that low-touch support, but just to ensure that that individual is able to sustain their income, their housing, their emotional well-being, and their safety. So just wanted to put that out there, that the approach is a little bit different, and we're happy to share more about that. I think there's also been a webinar that's available that's about case management support for human trafficking survivors.
Great. Thank you, Perla. And also, we'd like to highlight that we have a recorded webinar on this topic in terms of case management, in which Perla and her colleague go through the different stages and the needs and the process for both adult and also for minor, for each individual with different needs and different types of case management support needs. And so that we have it at the end of this PowerPoint. There's a link to that webinar as well. And we can also follow up with resources on this. So great, thank you. And now we have another poll, and we want to hear if you are seeing cases of human trafficking with an intersection with domestic violence and sexual assault. Great, thank you. Yeah, so a big number of you are seeing the intersection. So that is clear that there is a high intersection. So for that reason, a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault organizations, that's one of the reasons that more organizations are seeing the need to address this issue. So we provided this brief overview of human trafficking and the intersections with domestic violence and sexual assault. We know that it's basic and brief. There's a lot of resources and other webinars that go more in depth, and we can also follow up with you with more support and information. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act law has a survivor-centered framework that includes a framework called the 4 Ps. So this 4 Ps are for protection of survivors, including witness protection and benefits for survivors, as well as prosecution of perpetrators through definition of new crimes, prevention, including resources for public awareness and education, as well as partnerships with government, non-government agencies, and also public sector and federal, state, and local law. So through this framework, Futures Without Violence leads the project on building collaborative responses to address human trafficking, to help build multidisciplinary collaborations, and to support survivors of human trafficking with a focus on OVW grantees and partners. And we have been working on this for some time, for over 12 years. So now we will review a list of recommendations on things that domestic violence and sexual assault organizations and partners can do to better support survivors of human trafficking. And this will be a general overview, and we also have resources that can go more in depth into those areas. And we can also follow up with support. And many of you may be already doing this, but this is an overview of key things that we think that are important to address and to look at when working with survivors of human trafficking, if you're starting to or doing it already to better respond to survivors of human trafficking. And now Perla will help us go through those 10 things that we have identified. So the first, Perla, now you can go ahead, please.
Okay, let me change the slide. So the first thing that's really important is clarifying your role within your organization. So in our organization, because our agency was already, we're a dual service provider, we're serving some sexual assault and domestic violence survivors, we realized that we had the capacity to extend our services to foreign-born and domestic minor and adult survivors of human trafficking, male and female, whatever their gender was. And there are some organizations that perhaps if they don't have the sexual assault component, they've been more focused on the domestic violence, feel more comfortable focusing on working with adults only, and that's okay. So the first piece is to figure out what capacity your organization has and what sector of the human trafficking, what populations of human trafficking survivors can you support. What we did after that is we then looked at all of the domestic violence, sexual assault service providers in our county, the organizations that have confidentiality, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that later, why that's important. And we had a conversation around what kind of support are we going to provide to human trafficking survivors as victim service providers. And we identified a need, because the issue was so new back in 2003, to organize ourselves in a way where we had a point agency, so that if law enforcement or any of our other partners, governmental organizations, social workers, came into contact with a potential victim, instead of trying to figure out what organizations are serving human trafficking victims, who has a 24-hour hotline, who can provide in-person response, we have one agency that served as a point agency. And that has, for the last several years, Community Solutions has served that role. And so when a law enforcement agency identifies a victim, they would call one main number, and that the Community Solutions, as the point agency, would work behind the scenes to ensure that the victim service providers that were on board to provide in-person response when a human trafficking victim is identified, that we would work together to ensure that the in-person response happened in a way that's linguistically appropriate, culturally appropriate for the identified survivor, and that if there's cases of multi-victim operations, that we have that capacity as well. With the service providers, we also identified which organizations were going to extend their shelter services to human trafficking victims. So we know because of financial limitations, some agencies are not able to, but we identified what agencies can provide in-person response, what agencies can provide shelter services, and what agencies can provide that ongoing case management. So the first piece that we did as service providers, got organized and figure out for the victim services, the crisis response, the case management piece, who can do what. After that, we looked to our partners to figure out who can provide support again. And with these agencies providing the shelter, we also had to figure out what is there for minors. So who can support minors in terms of needing shelter, who can support minors in terms of the case management, what are the linguistic capabilities of our partners. So we have a whole system. We have, and I'm happy to share through Futures Without Violence, a point person referral form that we completed that is sent to the point agency in cases where there isn't a need for an emergency response, but there's a need for ongoing case management. And then we started looking externally to our partners. Our coalition was founded back in February of 2005, and we're fortunate to have over 30 member agencies. We structure the coalition so that we have a victim services committee, and that's the one that I mentioned. That's, again, we've identified what type of support each agency can provide. We also have a legal services committee, and in that legal services committee, the attorneys, they're all civil attorneys, and they coordinated themselves to make sure that there was enough response for immigration issues, employment law, because with labor trafficking, we see a lot of wage theft and other employment-related issues. Attorneys that focus on housing and social service benefits, victim rights attorneys whenever that's possible, and even family law attorneys in cases of those, intersections, domestic, or whenever there's any kind of family law issues. So those attorneys also organize themselves in the same manner to be able to ensure that survivors' needs are going to be met. And there's also a legal point agency. So every referral of human trafficking that's identified through one of our coalition partners goes to the legal point person, and that individual, that attorney, will conduct a thorough assessment and then connect the survivor to the legal needs they need, again, in response to their needs. We also looked, the third committee of our coalition is law enforcement, and that includes the DA's office, several local law enforcement organizations, as well as the FBI. And then the last group is our community outreach committee. And so among the other providers, we realized that there was a gap in terms of medical care. So we're able to identify an organization where we can do a warm handoff as soon as the human trafficking survivor is identified, connect them to that organization to ensure that they receive support while they're waiting to have their Medi-Cal approved and go through that process. And we also found that faith-based organizations were really strong supporters when it came to conducting community outreach, but also since if their advocates are not confidential and can't work directly with survivors, they've supported our clients by helping we have developed even an order form that we send over to our faith-based community members that included when a survivor's identified the clothes that they needed, if there was food needs, if there was any toiletry needs, phones, those types of things. So those are the ways in which we've been able to work collaboratively. The other thing that our coalition developed is a point of contact form that has on one sheet, if there's a need for a victim service provider, here's the point person for victim services. If there's a need for legal services, here's the number for the legal services point person. Who is the law enforcement point of contact? Who's the social services or Department of Family and Children Services point of contact? Who's the medical point of contact? And that piece has also been very helpful. I believe that there's an attached chart that can help identify the needs of survivors and local service providers in your area that you might be able to use. Is that correct, Monica?
Yes. So it's more of like a chart with a list of needs, and then for you to add who can provide that needs in your community, and if you have any relationship with them, and also are they trained on human trafficking. So it's more of an assessment for that, for assessing who is in your community. And we also have actually another handout that is also kind of like a checklist and assessment to see if you have many of these things that Perla is reviewing to address and support survivors of human trafficking. And also, like you mentioned, in terms of the protocol, and you'll go over the protocol later on as well, and that is part of that includes who needs to be part of who calls who in terms of referral.
Yes, we will go through that. Okay, thank you. So moving on, sorry, I think I went far. Okay, so the other piece that was really important to us, because I think one of the challenges is that as the survivors coming in, survivors, we have since 2003 that we've been doing this work, there's been a little bit of an increase, but it's very rare that individuals will come in and identify as a human trafficking survivor. That typically does not happen, although, thanks to community outreach and more awareness campaigns, we have seen an increase in survivors self-identifying. But we realize that it's really important to screen early on for potential human trafficking when we're working with domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. So as a result of that, that need to be screening in a routine and consistent manner, our Coalition Victim Service Provider Committee developed what we call an intersections screening tool for victim service providers. And this is I believe, 14-question tool that asks questions to identify if the individual is potentially, has been or is potentially a survivor or victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, or labor trafficking. And we asked all the service providers that are members of our coalition to use this tool with all of their open clients. So we wouldn't use this during a crisis response because obviously, 14 pages, it's just questions, it's just too much. But all of the clients that come into the shelter, we use this tool. We use this tool with all open clients in our domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking cases. And this tool has also been very helpful because if there's an organization that provides perhaps domestic violence and human trafficking services, but not sexual assault, when they complete the screening tool, if the individual identifies past or identifies sexual assault as an issue for them, then the advocate will ask, are you interested in receiving sexual assault services through a confidential advocate? If the survivor says yes, and then there's a warm handoff. Again, for agencies that don't provide that support in-house. They'll refer it to one of the 2 sexual assault providers in our county. And for the agencies like Community Solutions that provide domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking, this is an opportunity for us to connect that individual to those additional support services if the individual is interested. So that piece has been really important. It's also allowed us to see the data point, to develop some good data around those different forms and intersections of gender-based violence. So when we looked at this tool after administering it for about a year, we realized that 40% of the domestic violence survivors that came into our shelter were also had dealt with issues of sexual assault. We realized that about 10% of the survivors that came into our shelter, not originally presenting as human trafficking survivors, also had some type of human trafficking issues that have happened in the past or recently. That piece is really important. Again, I mentioned that our case management approach goes into 3 different phases. And so the case manager, when the case manager is assigned to a client, during that first phase of case management, the case manager will develop a goal plan with the survivor, and during that first 30 days, we're only looking at the emergency needs, the emergency basic needs. We're not going to overwhelm the survivor talking about where are you going to work and live 6 months from now. It's really getting those basic needs met, which could include unattended medical issues. It could include legal issues. It could include financial issues. So that piece is really important. We also develop safety plans based on what phase of case management somebody is in. So when they're in the emergency phase, the crisis phase, the safety plan will be based on that phase. When a survivor graduates into the transitional support phase, the case manager will develop a new goal plan that has goals that are specific to the needs and the areas of focus during that phase. And the caseworker will also work with the survivor to develop a new safety plan that focuses on that phase. Same thing with the long-term stability and sustainability needs. The other piece that's really important for us is that this intersection screening tool, we try to administer that with survivors at least every 6 months, because circumstances change. So we've had situations with somebody that came into the shelter when they first came in, there wasn't any issues around sexual harassment perhaps or sexual assault, and then 6 months down the road, something could have changed. So for us, it's important to always be addressing and identifying different types of trauma or abuse for survivors for the purpose of ensuring that we're addressing and supporting them, and also ensuring that they're connected to the legal services that they are entitled to. I'm happy to share the tool, but some of the questions that we keep in mind when we're screening for human trafficking, the intersection screening tool is just meant to carve out if somebody can potentially have been a victim of human trafficking. If it looks like that might have been an issue, then there will be a more in-depth type of screening that happens. So some of the questions to keep in mind is if the person was recruited, were they promised something, what were they promised, where are the person's passports or documents, was the person coerced, were there some kind of violence, threats, or psychological abuse, was the person paid for the work that they are doing, did they try to leave their job and then they can't because there's some consequences involved, and is the person afraid of his or her employer. Those are some key questions to keep in mind as you're screening for human trafficking.
Thank you, Perla. I think there are some questions about the sharing of that tool, and we didn't want to give it to everyone through this webinar, but we can share it if you asked for it. You can send me an email, and also we are thinking of doing a separate webinar training, because I know you have put together a training just on how to use this tool. So that is in the plans as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the other piece that's really important to us, and as Monica mentioned earlier, that the Trafficking Victim Protection Act is meant to be a victim-centered or survivor-centered approach or response to human trafficking. So it's really important to keep in mind that when we screen for human trafficking, it's not obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here, and we explain to survivors that it's not that human trafficking is a more severe form of abuse, because we know that there's domestic violence and sexual assault cases that are just, horrendous. But it's really important to keep in mind that there are some public benefits and resources that are available for human trafficking survivors. Human trafficking survivors, when they have an attorney that applies for a T visa, those survivors are eligible for 8 months of benefits, of federal benefits that include cash aid, Medi-Cal, and a little bit of food stamps. A lot of states, including California, have enacted state laws that mirror the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. So for example, in California, when a survivor, there's an attorney that files for a T visa for the survivor, usually for the survivor to get certified at the federal level, it'll take about 8 months. And so to bridge that gap of when the survivor can access the federal benefits, California has a state law that as soon as the social service agency receives a letter from an attorney or from an advocate that will go with the survivor to the social service benefits office, and that letter says, we think this person is a human trafficking victim, we're applying for a T visa, that person, that survivor, has the right to all the benefits that a refugee would have. So that's Medi-Cal, cash aid, and food stamps. And those benefits will go typically for about 8 months, and then the federal benefits kick in. So these are 60 months worth of benefits that human trafficking survivors are eligible for. And then the survivors can benefit regardless of how they came into the U.S. When they apply for some kind of legal remedy, that entry into the U.S. without permission or overstaying their visa can be waived. There's also special immigration and civil remedies for survivors. So many of you might be familiar with the T visa, which is a temporary 4-year visa. And after 3 years of having the T visa, or after the criminal investigation and prosecution has concluded, the human trafficking survivor can adjust to have their T visa status adjusted from a temporary visa to a legal permanent resident, which is huge. That piece is huge. With a T visa, it also takes lesser, because many of you are probably familiar with the U visa, which is a visa for victims of different types of crime. The U visa has a cap of 10,000 per year, 10,000 U visas per year, and as many of you know, there's typically like 70,000 requests per year. So we know that survivors applying for a U visa are waiting an average of 6 years just to have a work permit, and then another 4 years to have the U visa, and then they have to wait another 4 years from when they have the U visa to be able to adjust to legal permanent resident. The T visa, there's a 5,000 T visa cap per year, but that cap has never been reached, and so the amount of time that it's going to take for the survivor to have their work permit is going to be much faster. It's taking a little bit longer now, but it's about 8 months to a little bit over a year in comparison to the U visa. So that piece is really important. When we talk about a victim-centered response, that means including the survivor and decisions that are associated with their case. And for us, in Santa Clara County, the victim service providers, we really built our case management approach, our advocacy approach to human trafficking. We mirrored it after our domestic violence approach, which is based on Jill Davis' book, Safety Planning for Battered Women. So it's that same model. We really try to build symmetrical partnerships with survivors and respect them as the experts of their situation, respect their decisions. And for us, the focus really is on increasing information for survivors so that they can make a more informed decision, minimizing re-traumatizing survivors, and also connecting survivors to whatever specialized services that they're eligible for and entitled to.
Yeah, thank you, Perla. And I think we also have a handout on what is survivor-centered and trauma-informed. Yeah, thank you. And then for a lot of people that are asking about the tool again, we will follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So the other piece that in terms of how organizations can get ready, it's really important to assess your internal preparedness, capacity, and training needs. It's really important to train and develop the skills of your staff members, train them on the intersections of human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault so that they'll be able to better identify those potential victims. and be aware of what are the social service benefits as well as the legal remedies that are that human trafficking survivors are eligible for, particularly when they're foreign born. I mentioned earlier that there's also the case management approach is going to look a little bit different. It really is like a wraparound services. We have survivors, even foreign born, or even when we've worked with domestic sex trafficking survivors that perhaps have been exploited. For example, one of our clients had been exploited from the time she was 14 till she was 24. So basic life skills, learning how do you use their card that they're given for their benefits, how to take public transportation, learning how to set up a bank account, how to develop a resume. There's a lot of support that's involved in working with human trafficking survivors. So it's really important that staff are trained and they feel comfortable to be able to provide that support. The confidentiality piece is also huge, and I think we might talk about it a little bit later on, but it's really important for your organization to identify in your state if there is a caseworker privilege that protects communication between the caseworker and human trafficking survivors. The other piece that's really important too is to identify the type of clients, the type of human trafficking victims that you're seeing most frequently in your area to make sure that you have programs that are linguistically and culturally responsive. For us in Santa Clara County, from the time we started providing human trafficking services in 2003 to 2011, our focus was exclusively on foreign-born survivors of human trafficking. And then in 2011, early 2012, when nationally the focus went to domestic sex trafficking and particularly commercially sexually exploited children, we saw a significant shift. So all of our staff were bilingual, Spanish speaking, and the other common languages in our area. And then when the focus was put on sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children, we saw our numbers go to 70% of our clients now are domestic sex trafficking survivors, and only 30% are foreign-born human trafficking survivors. So it's really important then to have the right partnership, the right training. Human trafficking is very nuanced, and working with domestic minor sex trafficking survivors is also very nuanced. So make sure that you're aware what are the type of trafficking that you're seeing most frequently in your state, what populations does it affect, and then to have the training that's relevant and appropriate to be able to support that population. I can't stress enough how important training is, identifying what training you need and then seeking that training. That's really important. And the collaboration with other organizations as well.
Thank you. And I think you've kind of gone through the case management strategies already.
Yeah.
And in terms of needs and assessing, collaboration strategies, and then we have that webinar as well. So I think we're going to go to the next section, or we want to hear a little bit about the participants' experience in terms of collaboration, and we have another poll just to hear if you have been collaborating with others to address human trafficking. And we know that there are different experiences. We were going to ask you, do you have problems, challenges? And we know that there's always, challenges when we're collaborating with others, and also opportunities for learning how to better collaborate. And that's actually one of the main questions that a lot of you had in terms of how to better collaborate with others. So this is, great. A lot of you are already collaborating. A good part hasn't. So that's, hopefully this is something that you can think of as to assess, whom you would like to collaborate with. So thank you very much. And we also see that some of you, a good number of you, are part of a formal collaborative. So great. Thank you. And now we have safety planning. I think, Perla, you already mentioned something related to this in terms of safety planning. And Perla?
Yes, the only thing that I do want to highlight, and thank you for the time to really talk about safety planning and the importance of safety planning based on what phase of case management or support the survivor is in. The other piece that's really important is for advocates to find out in your state, because the majority of the cases are prosecuted at the state level, find out if there is a caseworker privilege in your state. For example, in California, the caseworker privilege is outlined in our Evidence Code Section 1038, but it would be really important for caseworkers to figure out if they're covered by any type of state caseworker privilege for human trafficking caseworkers, and be very careful around what the limitations of that confidentiality. The other piece that's really important, because we do have human trafficking survivors that the traffickers are affiliated with organized crime, so it's really important to take the safety of the survivors, but also that the caseworker safety is really important as well. So if, for example, if we have a case where perhaps the trafficker is part of organized crime or someone that's potentially dangerous, instead of having our advocates transport the client to court for the court hearing, we're going to work with our local law enforcement agencies and figure out a way to drive there together, work with the deputies at the courthouse to make sure that the defendant is entering the courthouse either before or after the survivor does, and that they're escorted out earlier so that the survivor doesn't have to see them in the hallway or anything like that. With personal cell phones, it's also really important with survivors that if they believe that they might be being tracked, to replace their cell phone. And the other piece that's really important, and I think that most domestic violence advocates and sexual assault advocates are very aware of this, but avoiding personal rescue missions. We do have individuals that will try to approach potential human trafficking survivors and might put themselves in a situation where they're at risk, but might also be putting the potential survivor at risk as well. So just collaborating with the relevant law enforcement agencies if there's a situation where a survivor is at risk is really important.
Thank you. And now we'll go, and a lot of this information that is being shared, as mentioned, is general, and more in-depth training is needed and more information. So we're just highlighting in terms of the things that you need to look into. So thank you, Perla. And we'll go to the next thing, which number 7.
I think
you also mentioned protocols already as well. All of this has been mentioned. And we also have actually an outline of a protocol, of what to include in a protocol in one of the handouts. Yeah, so, and anything else that you want to add to this?
No, I think that the only piece that I would say is that we also have, our coalition has a list of the protocols that we've developed, both for the service providers, legal providers, and then for our joint work. And we can perhaps during another training share some of those protocols. That's all I would add to
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, and then one of the protocols, one of the questions that maybe is relevant in this area is in terms of the safety and rescue issue, and that some people want to help, but how that can be dangerous and affect the safety of the survivor especially.
So our protocol, we have a protocol that specifies how to, when there's a human trafficking survivor that is identified by a community-based organization, what the steps are to support that survivor, especially there's the need for law enforcement involvement, and then what the approach would be if law enforcement identifies the survivor. And yes, we definitely discourage ever having a caseworker or an advocate or someone that's not with law enforcement be the person that, quote unquote, rescues. We don't use like the word rescue, but that's the person that brings in a survivor from an unsafe location into a confidential shelter or into a safe location. We work very closely with our law enforcement partners to try to minimize any type of danger to our advocates and to the clients as well.
Great, thank you. So very important. So now we'll go in, and this is also linked to that in terms of confidentiality.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, I mean, for all of you doing this work around domestic violence and sexual assault, I think that the important part is that we've had those conversations already with our non-victim service provider organizations in terms of the limitations with confidentiality. And so it's just being upfront with your partners, with law enforcement, with the DA's office, with victim witness, with medical providers, legal providers, that we cannot, even if we're sharing a case, we cannot share any type of information unless we have a release from the client, and that's something that the client wants us to do. And so that piece is really important. And that, that all the information that's shared, that the survivor has signed a consent form that specifies what the purpose is of sharing the information and what information will be shared. And I think that's all that I would say this slide.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think this is also, this next area, you've already highlighted a lot of this in terms of partnerships, importance of creating, partnerships and collaborations with others.
Yes, and I think that fortunately most states and regions have some type of human trafficking task force or collaborative. So it's really important, if there isn't one in your area, to try to plug in to the existing task forces or collaboratives that are out there. And some people have also rolled it into existing collaboratives, like there's regions where the domestic violence collaborative took on the human trafficking piece or sexual assault. That's also a good way to use existing collaborations and partnerships to extend the work to human trafficking.
Great, thank you. And that in terms of collaborations, and we'll share a little bit more in terms of resources and support that is available to support you if you want to be part of or develop or enhance collaborations. And for that, and in terms of this next slide also includes who can be part of this collaborative.
Yes, and we actually covered that a little bit earlier on in talking about how faith-based organizations have a role to play, social services, legal providers, mental health, advocates, etc. So it's really important to, again, identify what are the primary needs of the survivors you're going to be serving, and what existing organizations and partnerships can you leverage to provide that support.
Yes, and actually we also have another 2 webinars that are recorded, one on building or enhancing collaborations with community-based and faith-based organizations that are great, and I think Perla is also a co-presenter in one of them, and also another one on building collaborations with organizations or to meet the needs of survivors with disabilities. And great, thank you. So now we want to hear, and thank you for including a lot of the information in the chat, and just want to highlight that you will get also a link with all the resources that are in the link that are here listed in the files. And so now we want to hear from you about what strategies have been helpful to address human trafficking, either as an agency or in collaboration with your community partners. If you want to share one strategy, or that you would like to really, share, it's like, oh, we're having, this has worked, we were having this problem. You don't have to share the problem, but what has been helpful. If you want to share 1 or 2 things. And now, I'm not sure if, yeah, becoming members of a task force or a collaborative in your community, doing community outreach and supports. You partner with DVSA organizations, and safety and well-being of staff serving in the survivors, ensuring safety, great. And there's a lot of shares. And we're not going to go through it, but you guys can, this is also a peer learning opportunity, so please, learn from others as well. And we want to move forward with also some gaps, and we want to learn from you what are some gaps. So we have another poll, and so these are gaps that you're seeing, and of course that need some work, and you could work with others in collaboration, because not one organization can serve survivors, nor can they solve all these gaps or challenges. So we see a lot of people marked a lack of housing, emergency, long-term, and transitional, and maybe Perla can highlight some strategies that have worked in terms of to address this issue. And then lack of training as well. We can address this question later on. The mental health and opioid addiction is also another issue. But yeah, great. Thank you so much. Language access, cultural sensitivity. Great. And now we have, in terms of gaps in your community and training, I think this is a kind of a repetition, but this is more on services as well. Challenges. Now we have, this is a second question. Yeah, so lack of knowledge is needed, training, capacity within the organization, coordination, so better coordination, and funding. Okay, so those are, kind of this things that we just covered are 10 things that we think that as a collaborative, you can also look at the gaps and the needs, so you can work together with others. Perla, do you want to add anything related to this?
Just very quickly, in terms of the housing, because I think that that's a huge gap for most communities. We were able to, in our community, work very closely with the continuum of care and ensure that, like with domestic violence survivors, that human trafficking survivors also have access for programs like rapid rehousing. And we also, our continuum of care developed a questionnaire to screen out if there's domestic violence, sexual assault. Well, initially the intent was to focus on domestic violence, to screen domestic violence survivors for confidential support, and we ensured that they also included human trafficking in their questionnaire. So working with the different housing programs, again, the continuum of care is really important, and ensuring that the existing housing options are also extended to human trafficking survivors, in addition to domestic violence, has also been very helpful. So whenever we apply for grants now that have to do with housing, we ensure that we write in the language to house domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking survivors, so that we're not precluded from serving human trafficking survivors in those housing programs.
Great, thank you. So thank you so much. So I hope we hope this is helpful. So now we're going to go over briefly in terms of some of the support and resources that Futures Without Violence can provide, and you have the opportunity to access these resources through us as well, and we'll share some of the team members as well that are part of this project. So this is an OVW funded project, and that is geared towards supporting OVW grantees as well as partners seeking to work collaboratively and also identify best practices in preventing human trafficking. So we can provide, training as well as we have webinars, possibly site visits as well, and also in terms of TA, we can do over phone, email, as well as on-site TA, and we will also have more webinars coming up. One of them, probably a webinar or interactive webinar for one of the topics that I think would be helpful for people that are interested in the tool for screening. That all of you that requested it, we can probably plan a training that Perla can help us with on how to use this tool. So we will send you an invitation for that as well. And then we also, in terms of resources, we have compiled a big list of resources and toolkits and sample tools that we're not sharing publicly, but we can share one, if you request sample also protocols. And one of our goals also for the next process for this program is to gather a toolkit, or to put together a toolkit of sample model protocols and also an exchange of best practices with other peers. We also want to do a guide for domestic violence and sexual assault programs on collaborating with healthcare providers to address human trafficking. That's in the works, as well as a resource on collaborating to increase employment opportunities for survivors. And also, we have a training that is being planned for the fall. So if you're interested, we will send an invitation. But if you're interested, please start putting together a team. This training is 2 or 2.5-day training with participation in multidisciplinary teams. At least one person needs to be an OVW grantee, and it can include legal service providers, law enforcement, domestic violence, sexual assault advocates, community-based organizations. And the goal of this training institute is to assist participants to develop or enhance anti-human trafficking collaborations, identify victim-centered strategies to assist survivors, and also develop action plans to implement a collaborative response to address trafficking. And so this is a great opportunity for building partnerships and also addressing gaps. And we will probably have scholarships for law enforcement, one person per team as well. So that's a summary for that. And then in terms of other examples of TA that we have done, we have done some trainings, regional trainings for statewide training on human trafficking and collaboration, training for law enforcement and collaboration, as well as site visits with trainings for domestic violence and sexual assault advocates on enhancing or support for survivors within a domestic violence and sexual assault organization. And Perla, do you want to share some of the TA support that has been helpful for domestic violence and sexual assault organizations?
Sure. So I had the opportunity to, through Futures Without Violence, to visit a program in Oklahoma that was a domestic violence program that recently had extended services to human trafficking survivors as well. So I had the opportunity to first meet with the staff and have a conversation around a very similar presentation in terms of the intersections of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, to dispel some of those myths and try to mitigate some of the fears around extending their support to human trafficking survivors, and really got to ask them what their biggest concerns were and what kind of support they felt they needed to feel confident in working with human trafficking survivors. And then also had the opportunity to work with the leadership of that organization to talk more practically around training needs, as well as opportunities for identifying potential funding options and tracking data that would be helpful to them when they were pursuing funding opportunities at the local level for human trafficking services. Does that answer you? Did you want more details than that, or is that good? Monica? So I think we might be having some technical difficulties with Monica. So maybe just to keep us going, we could move to the next slide of who can benefit from the support. And I think Monica shared it briefly before: OVW grantees and partners that are seeking to collaborate, domestic violence and sexual assault programs and coalitions, human trafficking collaborative and task force members, legal service providers, law enforcement and healthcare providers. There's also worker rights and other community-based organizations that are working with survivors that would be able to benefit from this support. And this next slide talks a little bit about the support team at Futures Without Violence and some of the faculty members, and also provides Monica's contact information if you'd like more resources, technical assistance, or information in general. You can contact Monica at the email address provided below.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure what happened there. And yeah, we want to also highlight the great faculty, including Perla and Kiri, others that are part of the team that have a lot of experience, including working with law enforcement and collaborations. And so for next steps, we would like to, encourage you to discuss these questions with your organization, with your collaborations. Also use the tools or handouts that were sent or you will get for assessing your needs and what you think you can work on. And of course, we may all have a lot of needs, so prioritizing is important as well in terms of what you would like to work on first, in terms of addressing those needs in your community, within your organization as well, training needs and capacity building. And in terms of other resources, these are just a short list of resources, but there's in the handout, there's a long list of resources by topic as well that we have compiled. So please include it. And a lot of you or others are asking about sample brochures. So if you have brochures or outreach resources that you're using in your community that you can share, please send them to me as well so we can exchange, so we don't have to duplicate as well. So others don't have to duplicate and can learn from others. That would be great. And then we have, in terms of handouts, these are the handouts that are listed that you will get if you haven't downloaded them before. And so now in terms of questions, there were several questions. I'm not sure which one we want to address, but I think the main thing, one of the questions that I see here that is relevant is, what does case management mean? If a survivor stops services at some point, can the survivor not return? And I think that's related to the trauma-informed services, and that we actually are not. Bella, do you want to respond more to that?
Sure, and with any kind of case management or advocacy support, our approach is the same as with domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. All the services are voluntary, and survivors will seek the services when they feel ready. If they need to take a break from services and re-engage later on, we're always happy to see them re-engaging, but we would never tell a survivor that they're no longer eligible for services unless there was some type of drastic situation where somebody was potentially at risk. But again, understanding how trauma impacts individuals and that for safety, for other reasons, they might not be in a place where they can engage. We have many survivors that, particularly with commercial sexual exploitation of children or young adults, that are not ready to engage in services, but we plant that seed and sometimes they come back months down the road. We've had survivors that come back a couple of years down the road, and we want to make sure that the door is always open for them and that they always feel that they can return and seek services.
Great, thank you. One other question that came up from several people was in terms of housing and common housing or shelter for survivors of human trafficking within a domestic violence and sexual assault organization or shelter. If you split the clients or within the space, also within support groups, what has been helpful, and I guess also for foreign-born and domestic and minors.
So I think for us in terms of housing, we really try to take an approach that supports survivors where they are. So if they're in a situation where perhaps they have access to housing and just need financial support, we try to access rapid rehousing dollars or other support to allow that individual to stay where they are. In terms of coming into the shelter, we do have at our shelters, which is a domestic violence shelter, we repurposed one of the rooms because we understand that survivors are going to human trafficking survivors, for the most part, are going to need a lot longer support than some domestic violence survivors in terms of housing assistance. And so what we've done is that we've repurposed one of the rooms so that we're not taking away capacity for the domestic violence survivors. We repurposed one room into a human trafficking survivor room, and we have labor trafficking and sex trafficking survivors. The majority of the survivors that come into our shelter are foreign-born labor trafficking survivors for some reason. I'm not quite sure what to attribute that to. But we mix survivors that speak different languages just the way that we would with the rest of the house. Human trafficking survivors usually stay in our shelter for an average of 8 months to a little bit over a year. This is not a promising practice, and it's just a lack of options. And I think that because the confidential shelters are so restricting in terms of not being able to have visitors, there's so many limitations, it's really hard for survivors to move up that case management model and be able to start reintegrating into the community when they have all those limitations. And every time that a human trafficking survivor, when they're in their shelter for a while, every couple of weeks, sometimes once a week, they're being re-triggered with survivors that come in with their right out of crisis and trauma. So it's not ideal, but what's worked for us is to have a separate room in a different part of the house for human trafficking survivors where they can stay for up to many, many months. And the support groups that we put together, our support group is called, is really focused on trauma related to gender-based violence. So it's not really specific to domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. It's really more around addressing the trauma and its impact, addressing gender-based violence, and focusing on healthy coping mechanisms for survivors of different forms of trauma and abuse.
Great, thank you. And I think we're at the end of the time, but I know you have also done great work with survivors and now have done empowerment and support and have a great group of survivors now that you're supporting and encouraging to speak and share about their experiences. So that's another topic that we could highlight next time. So thank you so much for participating and for joining the webinar. Please remember to fill out the evaluation, which should pop up on your screen when you exit the meeting. Your feedback is very important to us. Through this evaluation, you can also request additional resources and send specific questions and also request a certificate of participation. And if you have any questions or need any information, please, contact Monica Arenas and email on the screen as well. And thank you so much, Perla, for sharing your experience and great work. We look forward to working with you more on this. And thank you also to Alicia from the National Council for helping with hosting of the webinar. And thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.